Hello, I'm Jim Cornell, and this is Base to Base, the weekly biotech podcast from Air Coastal Media. Yes, welcome again to the Base to Base Biotech podcast, and this is number 34, going out on November the 7th. Halloween's done, next up is Thanksgiving, then Black Friday, then Christmas, and that's another year done. Thanks to those who commented on the Halloween top 10 scary things about biotech list. Seems that it resonated with quite a few people, mostly the fundraising one. The one people seemed to find the funniest was creating a side effect that you could then develop a drug for. Had some good suggestions from listeners as well. A few people mentioned computers crashing when analysing data. I agree, that's pretty scary. I remember once in the very early days of using computers to lay out magazines, the night before publication, my computer crashed, and it was in the days before automatic backups. You had to save them onto a disk, and it took a long time, so for the most part we didn't bother. And I wish that I had, because I lost the entire magazine the night before publication and finished rebuilding it about 5 a.m. when it had to be at the printers by 8. That was scary. Last week we had conversations with Funky from Estonia, Beckley SciTech on psychedelics, and Sweden's Farm Novo, and that was done at NLS Days in Gothenburg. I've still got some leftovers from both of those events, the one in Gothenburg and also in Vilnius in Lithuania. We will get to them all, but not today. This week we have a timely interview because it's World Immunization Day on Monday, so we had a chat with Geovax Chairman, President and CEO David Dodd about that. And in the other conversation, we talk about infertility with Igyxos Biotherapeutics Chief Medical Officer, Elke Bestel. If you do have news or suggestions for who should be on the podcast, or indeed any other suggestions or comments, please do get in touch at jim@deeptechdigest.com, which is also the address that you can use if you're interested in advertising with us or sponsoring a podcast episode. Before we get to the first interview of the week, let's take a look at the news you may have missed over at deeptechdigest.com. Immune checkpoint inhibitors can promote tissue repair. New findings could pave the way for an ear infection vaccine. And Eli Lilly and Nvidia are building what is said to be the industry's most powerful AI supercomputer. There were positive top-line results from a trial on a frontotemporal degeneration treatment. Myrio Therapeutics is going to work with research institutions on solid tumour T-cell immunotherapeutics, and there was an article on CAR-T therapy in South Korea. Valthos has raised $30 million to build next-generation biodefense. An AI-designed alopecia drug has completed its US Phase 1 trial, and we had an article on the future of in vivo cell engineering. A major diabetes fundraiser was launched. Eli Lilly is investing $1.2 billion in a Puerto Rico facility, and you can read all of these and plenty more at deeptechdigest.com. So let's get to the interviews. Infertility is a massive issue globally. Around 1 in 6 people experience it, and it affects both men and women. There are treatments such as assisted reproductive technologies, but it's definitely an area ripe for companies to make a big difference. One of those is French company Igyxos Biotherapeutics, and our first conversation this week is with the company's Chief Medical Officer, Elke Bestel. Hi Elke, thanks so much for joining us today. Maybe we could start by asking you to tell us a little bit about the company.
Igyxos is a small French biotech company. Actually, it was founded in 2017 by the researcher at the INRAE Institute. It's an agroalimentary research institute in France, and it was founded by Marie-Christine Morel, who was a researcher at this institute. And the headquarters is in Tours, which is in the middle of France. And Marie-Christine Morel, she discovered during her research with animals the monoclonal antibody, which is now the humanized version is Igyxos, which stimulated the action of FSH in animals. FSH is follicle stimulating hormone. And this is when she brought up the idea to create Igyxos to develop this antibody in humans.
Has the biotech industry been involved in treatments for infertility for a long time?
Well, quite from the beginning. I think the only problem is that people forget that these were biotech industries who that developed the medications. The most known maybe gonal F. It is recombinant follicle stimulating hormone, which was developed by Geneva-based biotech company Serono. Serono developed gonal F, and they developed as well recombinant HCG under the trade name Ovitrel today. And they got acquired in 2006 by Merck. They were then Merck Serono, now it's only Merck Healthcare, but everybody knows Merck, but they acquired this molecule from a biotech. And then in the field of ART, there are multiple other things which were developed by biotech industries. For example, you need culture media in order to make the embryos grow, or the cryopreservation, which is used quite often nowadays. You take the embryos and you freeze them in order not to transfer all of them in the first cycle. This was developed as well by biotech companies. So from the very beginning, there has been biotech involved.
Do you have any information on how big of an issue infertility is, either globally or regionally?
Yeah, sure. It's an increasing issue. In the entire world, nowadays, it's 1 of 6 couples. In developed countries, it's even higher. In the US, currently, it's 1 of 5 couples who struggle with infertility. We know that women nowadays pursue first a career before thinking of creating a family, which leads to a later age at first birth. And we all know that with increasing age, the fertility declines. And in men, we observe a decline in sperm count since the 70s, and this is even accelerated in the new millennium. So there is an increasing issue. It is estimated then in 40 years, the average man is infertile if the sperm count at its current speed is continuing. So it's an increasing important issue.
What have the challenges typically been with developing treatments for infertility?
Well, it starts already with a scientific challenge that it's not necessarily only one single cause which creates infertility. Sometimes there are several factors included. Then there are always 2 parts, the male and the female part. In former times, it was thought that it's mainly a problem of the female, but this was only due to the fact that the diagnostic tools were still insufficient to detect the male infertility. Nowadays, it is thought that infertility is 50-50, male and female origin. Then the next problem is that the understanding of the reproductive biology is still not complete. There are still parts we ignore. The next thing is we have ethical constraints. It would be easy to prove the improved fertility in a woman you give a treatment if you could give her the sperm of a for sure fertile man. But of course, she wants that the sperm comes from her husband, who may have issues as well. Then the next is a regulatory issue. Of course, you treat a woman, but then she becomes pregnant, and there is as well a child. So you may have effects even on the child. So the thresholds to get approval include all the reproductive toxicity, the offspring safety. You have to follow the children up to birth or even beyond. Then there are, of course, technology problems that, for example, for certain manufacturing, it is very complex when you enter, for example, the biologic treatments. So there are several challenges to be overcome in order to develop treatments in this field.
Could you tell me a bit about FSH and its role in fertility?
FSH, the follicle stimulating hormone, is actually a hormone which is involved in both genders in fertility. It is issued by the brain, by a small pituitary gland. It's a gland which is below the brain. It is issued, and then in women, it stimulates the ovary to make the egg mature and to produce estradiol. It works during the menstrual cycle on the egg maturation and the ovulation, and in men, it works on the spermatogenesis. So in both genders, it is a key hormone working on the production of the gametogenesis.
How did you tackle the problem, and how have you been working on this?
Well, we work with Igyxos, which is a monoclonal antibody which binds to FSH. It binds very firmly to the hormone and it stabilizes it. Then it stabilizes as well the interaction between the receptor and the hormone. So this leads to a better activation of the receptor and to better response of the target cells. So it has been shown that the output of FSH plus the antibody is better than of FSH alone. And you cannot just increase the dose of FSH, for example, to obtain the same output.
So where are you at with clinical trials at the moment?
We have started and are near to completion of our first in-human trial. We have completed already the single ascending dose study, and safety was really very good. And we are currently about to finalize our multiple ascending dose study. And we plan actively to start into phase 2.
And so what are you looking for from the phase 2 studies? What's the goal?
We intend to develop Igyxos in male and in female infertility. So we intend to have 2 studies, of course, in either gender. We are currently discussing with authorities in order to design studies with the correct endpoints so that authorities will accept the studies later in order to approve the drugs, of course, and to design correctly our phase 3 studies first. It is really a couples issue.
All right. Is there a difference in the way that it works for males and females? I mean, do you expect there to be differences in the efficacy between males and females?
Yeah, of course, because female cycle and male spermatogenesis is very different. So first of all, male have a very lengthy cycle to produce sperm. It's about 75 days to have one turnaround in the spermatogenesis. This needs, of course, a different design in a trial than in a woman. A woman has 1 menstrual cycle to produce 1 egg, or you undergo 1 IVF cycle in order to increase the output and retrieve several eggs. So, of course, there will be a difference in the design of the trials and in the endpoints we will look at.
Recently had an announcement of funding. What does that mean for the company?
It was, of course, fantastic news for us because it shows the trust of the French government they put in us. We are still looking for further funding, which is necessary in order to be able to run our phase 2 studies. But of course, it's already a major achievement, and where we hope that other investment funds will take this as an additional proof of our potential to develop a game changer in infertility.
Obviously, we're not at the stage yet where you're talking about commercializing this, but what will your strategy be to talk to doctors and other clinicians to adopt this in a space that's typically been dominated by assisted reproductive technologies?
Well, we are working not against assisted reproductive technologies. We are working with it. It would be another treatment in assisted reproductive technologies. And if our clinical studies will prove what our animal studies demonstrated so far, this would be absolutely game changer in the space of infertility, because it would become the first male treatment. Currently, the clinicians have nothing to offer in case the infertility comes from the male part. And in the female part, we do not know yet, but it may either provide a better efficacy as current treatments, or it may provide a similar efficacy, but a reduced patient burden so that less additional treatments are necessary for the women. And in both cases, I think clinicians would be very happy and eager to use a new drug in order to have a better possibility to serve their patients, because currently all of them have patients that are completely underserved. We expect Igyxos, if our human studies demonstrate the same thing as our preclinical studies, that it is really a breakthrough innovation, because it is the first treatment in male infertility. And we work on helping the men and the women to have an improved fertility.
All right. You mentioned that it's potentially a breakthrough. What's the reaction been like to those early results in terms of it being such a game changer?
Well, we have a quite extensive scientific advisory board. There are a lot of very well-known, worldwide well-known experts on it, and they are very enthusiastic looking on our preclinical studies and the results we could provide so far.
Are there any other companies that are working on not necessarily the same mechanism that you are, but are there other companies working on this?
Yeah, of course, there are other companies working as well on male infertility. There's always competition. Competition is good as well because it opens the space and the interest.
And of course, you never know whether one fertility treatment is going to work better than another depending on the person that you're dealing with. So it's always good to have options, absolutely.
And as I mentioned, the origin of infertility may be multifactorial. So one treatment may treat one condition and another treatment treats another condition. So there's always space for several treatments.
So where do you go from here? What are the next plans as well as the clinical trials?
We have received a first funding from the French government, but we are still looking for additional funds to be able to start our phase 2 studies in men and women. We are in discussion with authorities in order to design these studies aligned to fit the needs of the approving authorities, like FDA, like European Medicines Agency, to have studies which will fit the needs of the several authorities. Once we have received the funds, we will start the phase 2 studies, and with the results of the phase 2 studies, we will start to design phase 3 studies, again in cooperation with authorities. It's always a discussion with authorities. It's ongoing over years generally, before you will get finally the phase 3 studies and be able to compile a dossier for approval.
Are there any other things in your pipeline, or are you concentrating on Igyxos?
Currently, Igyxos is our most advanced project. There is another project, but which is entirely in the preclinical stage so far.
Excellent. Are there any things that we didn't talk about that you wanted to mention?
The burden of treatment that currently it's so unfair that, IVF, the burden is always with a woman, not with a man. To speak about the burden of treatment for women, currently, if there's male infertility, the only option a couple has is making the woman undergo an IVF treatment. and then take the egg and inject one spermatozoa in it, and then re-implant the egg. So it means for a man, he just has to provide his sperm. For a woman who may be completely healthy, because it's her husband who has an infertility problem, she has to go 12 to 14 subcutaneous daily injections. Then from day 6 of her cycle, she will get a treatment in order to prevent that ovulation takes place, because you want to harvest the eggs. Then in the middle of the cycle, she receives the next treatment in order to trigger the ovulation. Then she undergoes the retrieval procedure, which puts a needle in her womb to retrieve the egg. Then the in vitro, the injection procedure of the spermatozoa takes place. And then she has a blastocyst, the embryo, put back in her womb. But she receives all the treatment. Treatments have side effects. Some women even, they complain about bloating, they complain about water retention. Some women, they have so important problems, they end up in emergency unit because of a so-called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So it's real burden for a woman to have all these treatments over the cycles where they don't feel well, you are overstimulated, and you are healthy. The problem is the man. So this is just so unfair. If IGX-12 could help either that men have treatment, or that women have less burden, or at least that it's worth the burden, that the output, the egg retrieval is sufficient to get pregnant, I think this would really be a fantastic achievement.
Well, it's great that infertility, which was often a taboo subject in the past and often blamed solely on women, may soon have much better options thanks to Igyxos. I'm sure there are listeners who, even if they haven't experienced it directly, know someone who has, and the more options the better. Next is a timely conversation because next Monday, November the 10th, is World Immunization Day. So, who better to talk about that than David Dodd, Chairman, President and CEO of a company front and centre in the vaccine sector, and that's Geovax. All right, so maybe to start then, before we start talking about what you're doing with your company, I wonder if you could tell me a bit about World Immunization Day and the importance of that.
Yeah, it's very important. It's every year on November the 10th, declared by the UN, and the UN is affiliated, obviously, with UNICEF. And it's all about communicating and increasing the awareness of the value and the value historically, as well as looking forward, of immunizations or vaccines and all, and what it's provided for healthcare, throughout the world. I mean, from everything from polio to measles, diphtheria, et cetera, to even, newer diseases that arise that we never had even thought about in the past and all. So it's all built around a day of focusing on the value and spreading the word in terms of the value and the need for vaccinations now. It improves people's lives and all. This year is probably one of the more challenging years, and certainly related to that in the U.S. with the level of distrust that has been built in the U.S. about vaccines and all. Although it's a dichotomy, because I was looking at 90%, over 90% of adults in the U.S. will tell you that they consider vaccines for children safe. Also, around 80% will tell you that they believe that immunizations or vaccinations relative to school requirements are an important aspect of it. Yet at the same time, almost 60% will tell you that they have concerns specifically about COVID-19 safety aspects and all. And this whole trust gap is created to this tremendous wedge and all. And so therein lies the big challenge that we in the industry and just any of us who are concerned about public health in general are dealing with. I don't know how that level or that trust gap, I'll call it, is reflected on a global basis, but as I travel I hear these questions and all about these things, but it's an important day to focus on and try to highlight the aspects. And the Biotech Innovation Organization, or BIO, which is based out of Washington, D.C., and I serve on the Vaccine Policy Steering Committee and other committees there. It has an ongoing campaign, and it's viewed probably with some skepticism by some, because bio at the end of the day is a trade association, that's by the industry, et cetera. But it's trying to communicate and clarify the value and benefits and importance of vaccinations and all. And then obviously there are some that will accept it and there are others who will not. But that's what World Immunization Day is all about. Now in April every year there is the World Immunization Week. Since these both are sponsored by different entities.
Yeah, but maybe in some ways that might be a good thing, because you kind of get double the bang for your buck in two different times of the year.
We take advantage of it because as a industry player with multiple vaccines in development, again, we're pre-revenue, but we'll be initiating about this time next year our pivotal phase 3 with a vaccine, the one for which the EMA has granted us an expedited path. So we hope to sooner rather than later be in the fray of products that are authorized and being distributed and obviously being commercialized and beginning to generate revenue. So it's important in that regard from that. And we do take advantage of both, like you say, of both of those, because they provide us as a member of the industry to basically raise awareness that Geovax is there in the area of hopefully bringing forward with innovation and commitment to improve healthcare worldwide, new and novel vaccines. So it does give us a platform twice a year. So that is a good point.
Could you give me maybe a bit of an overview of the industry right now and what's maybe on the horizon?
Sure. Right now, the industry, certainly in vaccines, feels somewhat beaten up. Just earlier this week, there was the Fall Vaccine Policy Steering Committee in Washington, D.C. And a few years ago, what was in vogue was to be in the vaccine industry. Over the last couple of years, that isn't as much in vogue now. And more recently, it's become, a frustrating, challenging environment. And so especially for companies that are in clinical or any stage, I'll call it a pre-revenue development. Probably a bigger challenge if you're in preclinical, meaning you're not in the clinic yet, so you're still doing animal testing. But even if you're in, we have multiple clinical trials, so human trials of vaccines underway, and yet it's still a very challenging time to be able to raise money, because if you're pre-revenue, you live off your balance sheet. I mean, just by definition, because there's no source of income. And you either raise money by selling equity in the company, we're a public company traded on NASDAQ, but if we were a private company, we would still look to finance it that way. Or you look for non-dilutive funding, and that could be through government grants and funding, and they have been revised, let's put it, within the U.S. federal government of sources of funding there. So that makes a greater challenge from a partnering perspective. Typically, if you develop, because as a small company, we hold worldwide rights for all of our assets, so we plan to develop our products for broad global utilization. And so, for instance, next year we'll be initiating clinical trials we have a COVID-19 vaccine specifically for people with weak immune systems, and in that case, we're going to be opening sites throughout the UK. And so we've been developing the relationships to do that for the last year plus. So we'll be rolling that out next year. Being able to finance that becomes a real challenge, and so we'll be looking for partners. And typically, with partnering, there'll be some form of some funding up front and then some arrangement, a structure of a deal type thing. Right now in the vaccine industry, it's a challenging time for all players, because even if you're out there and you have products on the market, if you look at it, the purchases for people who have flu vaccines are significantly below what they had expected that would be the need for that. And that's probably because people are being very cautious because of confusion on certain guidelines, and also this public questioning. People will tell you, no, I have no questions with flu vaccines. I've been taking them for years and all that. But at the end of the day, they look at a vaccine as a vaccine. And generally, the driver for the public distrust is more or less driven by the experience people felt that they had and that they had to deal with, where a lot of their own personal decision making was superseded during the COVID-19 pandemic. And that created a very negative, distrusting, and somewhat, I want to say hostile, I'll just say pushback environment from the public in general. No. And I think that's not unique just to the U.S., but it certainly has had an impact. So if you're someone out there that at this time of the year would normally be actively commercializing and selling your annual flu vaccine, they're not selling as much. So it's a challenging time. For us, we have one big plus because we've recently announced the guidance on the EMA. We made a decision 2 years ago not to focus on the FDA for going forward as our lead area for jurisdiction for registration, and we chose to go with the EMA, and that's with a vaccine that's for mpox and smallpox. Our focus was to negotiate to get an expedited pathway, and they have accepted our argument. We announced in June that we had this expedited pathway. For us, we've been able to raise a little bit of money over the summer and more recently, to our balance sheet, which is good. And I think it's because that announcement was viewed surprisingly, very positively. And frankly, some people seem to think, how did you guys know before the 2024 election what was going to happen, and you didn't focus on the U.S., you focused on the EMA? That had nothing to do with it. We were not hedging a bet on the election and what was going to happen. We did it for certain strategic reasons from a competitive standpoint. But in the end, it has helped us out a little bit because we've got that. Now, the other thing is, if you're a company that does vaccines and also does especially oncology, and we do that, and we have an impending phase 2 trial for first-line head and neck cancer. So it then gives you a different profile. So we're not as in such I'll call it a harsh environment than if we were just vaccine only, because people are very interested in innovation relative to solid tumor cancers. No. So it's how your company is structured and how your portfolio is built that sort of determines. But I would say definitely this is not the highlight of times of being in the vaccine industry.
What's coming? I mean, we've heard about thermostable and oncology vaccines. Are they on the horizon? And if they are, how far away are they?
The technology that we use for, and this is the basis for this vaccine for which we received this exemption from EMA, it's already been demonstrated and is approved. In fact, the competitor we're going against in the immunobridging trial, it's approved to be delivered without any refrigeration. So it can be lyophilized or freeze dried. So certain technologies already can be delivered in a non-refrigerated and certainly non-frozen state. You recall one of the challenges with mRNA was it has to be delivered at minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and then it's only good when it's thawed for 4 to 6 hours. That presents a real, what I'll call administration and distribution challenge for certain regions of the world, as you can imagine. And so that's a big challenge. But there are technologies that can avoid that. That's what we use for, and we use one in that regard for all of our infectious disease vaccines. In terms of oncology, there's been some news recently that people that receive the COVID-19 Moderna mRNA, they have better response for certain cancer therapy and all. What's probably going on there is that the priming of the immune system from the mRNA vaccine enhances the operational aspects or how the cancer treatment is working. What we're doing in oncology is we deliver using a vaccine vector, a certain gene therapy, and what we're going to be initiating next year on the clinical phase 2 trial is we combine that with Merck's Keytruda, and it appears to double the level of performance of Keytruda by having the body's immune system stimulated with that vaccine delivery. So I think those are on the horizon. We're not in the clinic yet with it, but we have developed using vaccine technology, using tumor-associated antigens candidates that could be an actual cancer vaccine that people have been seeking now for decades, as you know, they've been talking about it. I think there will be, within the next 3, certainly 5 years, there will be some significant progress in that regard, that we'll see some. They won't cover all cancers. They'll be very specific to a targeted indication, but they may be leverageable, so to speak. For instance, we believe the technology that we're going to be taking to the clinic for a first-line diagnosis of head and neck cancer, which we think will double the response rate of what is on the market, and Merck has an approval. Right now, what they have for Keytruda is a 10% response rate, and they have an approval for that, for usage of that. And we think will be a doubling that effect from what we've seen so far with that combination of it. But we also think that'll be applicable to triple negative breast cancer and other solid tumors also. Obviously, over time, that'll be determined by the clinical trials that are done, but we're going to be initiating during the next year not only that clinical trial, but also some more animal studies against different types of solid tumors. So triple negative breast cancer, maybe endometrial cancer, et cetera, that we're going to be doing those models with this combination to lay the foundation for that. But I think from everything the scientists are telling us, both internally and what we read and we hear externally, it's all progressing in a positive direction.
We talked about COVID a little bit earlier. Have we learned anything from the COVID vaccine development?
What we did learn was that mRNA, first of all, there's not one technology that works for every type of vaccine and delivers vaccines that one vaccine is good for everybody. Specifically, in the U.S., there are over 40 million people who suffer from a medical condition. It could be blood cancer, it could be kidney disease, it could be diabetes, it could be lupus, multiple sclerosis. It's a host of HIV, a host of medical conditions that deplete your immune system so that it does not respond to antibody stimulation. And the challenge with the mRNA, and in the U.S. also with the Novavax vaccine, are that they are vaccines that only induce antibody responses. And yet you've got these 40 plus million people in the U.S., it's over 400 million worldwide, who don't respond to those conditions. In the UK, for instance, today, you'll find people still sequestered in their homes. This was part of our discussions at University of Liverpool, because we're working with a team there in this regard, focusing specifically on immunocompromised populations. That's going to be part of the trial we're opening in the UK next year and all. So we're looking at patients who have weakened immune systems, and how do you protect them? Because today people just we just keep giving them an mRNA vaccine every other month just to give them an antibody boost, if nothing else. And you point out, you say, yeah, but they don't respond to it. Well, it's better than nothing. That's not a good solution. So the solution that we've learned is what is known, those are all single antigens. So they only target one part of the virus and they do the antibody. But a multi-antigen, which also addresses T cells or cellular immunity, is out there. In fact, our vaccine is the most advanced worldwide in the clinic of not only antibody inducement, but also the T cell side. And we just presented 2 presentations at the World Vaccine Congress in Amsterdam in the week of October 13th, and we presented more recently at the European Hematology Association and at the International Workshop on Chronic Lymphocytic Leukemia, which was in Krakow, Poland, that we're doing 2 randomized trials comparing our vaccine to mRNA vaccines among specific patient populations who have these weakened immune systems. One are blood cancer patients who are receiving stem cell transplantation, because you intentionally deplete their body's ability to reject the stem cells, which means you ablate their antibodies immune system, which means they don't respond to the vaccines. And in that one, our vaccine is showing the same level of antibody response as mRNA, but a multiple of what on the T cell side. And that's providing the protective immunity that they otherwise aren't getting. And we're showing durability of 8 to 12 months versus 3 to 6 for mRNA, and we're showing protective immunity levels. And on chronic lymphocytic leukemia, a condition, a blood cancer, where people have no response to antibody stimulation, we have underway a direct comparison to the Pfizer trial. And this one, the first one is either Pfizer or Moderna we're comparing to. This one is our vaccine compared directly to the Pfizer vaccine. And in that one, last November, we announced that the Data Safety Monitoring Board had halted the Pfizer arm because it was ineffective. In the remainder of the trial, the patients are only receiving our vaccine because we surpassed the targeted endpoints for the interim points. So what we've learned is that there is no perfect vaccine platform. There is none. And that secondly, that you have to think of the broader populations, because most people with immune compromised conditions, they don't die from their conditions. Someone with chronic lymphocytic leukemia, by and large, they will die from an infection, not from the blood cancer that they get. But they become so immune depleted that they don't have any protection. And so that happens in a number of these. Same thing if someone has lupus or multiple sclerosis, they're at a high risk and they don't respond to the current vaccine. So what we have learned that originally we thought, as we were going, we were in the height of the pandemic, we had these new vaccines, this new technology, they were going to be the cure-all. There was about a year there that we were being told, if you're not doing mRNA, throw your technology away because it's a new era. Everything is mRNA. And we learned that not so fast. It has some very positive attributes and has some areas of application. But when you get into this case, a very significant but subgroup, 40 plus million in the U.S. is not the 320 or 30 million in the U.S., but still it's a lot of people who are at risk. And when you look at the populations that throughout the U.K., we started working with Oxford and University of Sheffield and Liverpool and others all about this, because we identified there was a study that came out from the UK Cancer Consortium that specifically was addressing how these patients were not responsive to the current mRNA vaccines and something else was needed. And we had already started our clinical trials, so we reached out and connected with the key investigators behind that, and that has led us to our relationships that we've developed and for our plans to roll out this new clinical. So I would say this: what we have learned, first of all, and this is part of the discussions with WHO and others here that we're having, is this virus, and it's true also with the mpox virus. There are certain viruses, HIV is a great example, which is why we today still have no vaccine against HIV, is certain viruses evolve continuously. This isn't the case. Measles, you get a vaccine, you're pretty good for life, that type of thing. But when you get into SARS-CoV-2, it continues to evolve. And what we originally had, it seems so long ago, the Wuhan strain is so far behind us. And we were delighted when we did this study that we tested the serum, which was taken from people who had been vaccinated with our vaccine that included the Wuhan strain of that, and it showed protective immunity all the way through the Omicron, so the latest one at the time that we tested on. That wasn't true. That isn't true with mRNA. So by taking a multiple component approach, and the challenge with mRNA is that technology won't allow you to do multiple parts of the virus. You can do combinations. That's very complicated. But our technology, which is very difficult and is slow to manufacture compared to mRNA, that's the downside of it. But what you're able to do is put multiple proteins or antigens into it, and we've done that before, and the one we have in the clinic has two components, and we induce both sides of the immune system, and it seems to work exceedingly well from that regard. So we're very pleased. So we've learned that it wasn't true that in early 2021, I can remember the chief medical officer of Moderna being interviewed and saying that if you're doing vaccines and you're not doing mRNA, you ought to just walk away because this is the only technology you'll ever need. You need multiple approaches, just like in so many things. And that's what we've learned, is there is no one size fits all. And you got to continue to seek innovation. And in the case of our technology, it's an old technology that's known for being extremely safe. It does not replicate in human cells, so it's exquisitely safe for humans. There's no risk of some of these other adverse effects, so we like that. But the challenge has always been it's very slow to manufacture. And so that's the challenge we're trying to address now with a new manufacturing process. But I think it over time we'll see that combining an mRNA technology with, for instance, our type of technology probably will have synergistic value. And so we think that. So give the prime vaccine mRNA, you can get a lot of those out there, and then for certain populations, do a booster for something that's going to last a lot longer, be much broader protective. Sort of when new variants come up, it'll provide protection against that, and that may be a better way. So what they call a prime boost type of thing. So I think we've learned that this is an area that's a better approach than simply trying to say one and done, because we were all told that. For some of us, it sounded too good to be true, and before a year was up, we saw that indeed it was. So.
If there was another pandemic just around the corner, would we be able to respond as quickly? Obviously, COVID is still evolving, but
Yeah, we're trying to do that with Mpox right now. I mean, it's not as much. It is evident in the UK. It's evident in the US now, and in Western Europe. It's obviously focused in Africa. But WHO will tell you, we were just told by the person overseeing that program, do not slow down. We need your product out here sooner rather than later. The world needs more product. The demand globally for like Mpox, that's one they're worried about, is the current strain is almost 10 times more deadly than the more virulent and has a mortality rate almost 10 times the rate as the one we were dealing with in 2022. It's much more the contagion factor. It's easily transmitted to people, so people are very concerned about that. The world isn't responding, at the level that they are in Africa, and so we're working on that, and we hope to be receiving sponsorship from some of the non-government organizations, NGO funding entities, and all, to be able to accelerate. We have a new manufacturing process that would enable our type of technology to respond more in real time, which is what we need when a pandemic hits. You don't want to have to develop it if it takes months to. I mean, so we're working on technology that we could do a manufacturing process in a week's time, and that would then enable us to then be able to fulfill needs when there was a real pandemic outbreak.
right, you mentioned the immunocompromised. Is there anything specific being done to address helping those people?
The major thing right now is the vaccine programs that we have. Ours is again, we're targeting specifically for COVID-19. And right now, there's not a vaccine that works for them, because most vaccine technologies are built on a single antigen from the virus, which then will induce an antibody response. Antibody responses are important. They're your first line of immune defense. So you want to sort of block that incoming. If you think about it, there's a wave coming. You want to sort of block that. But it's the cellular immunity, or T cells, that clear a virus from the body and that drive memory, which means durability and all. So you really need to engage the two sides of the immune system to really do the job. And most people and most vaccine technologies are all structured because they're easier to manufacture, faster to manufacture. That's like mRNA. The downfalls are that they don't address all populations, and especially immunocompromised. So we've had a unique position that for a good while it seemed like we were being ignored. We were just funding it on our own and all. But now, as people are recognizing, wait a minute, they know people, they have relatives, they have neighbors, they have colleagues who either have medical conditions or have people they know who have medical conditions for whom the current vaccines are inadequate, and they still are essentially in the pandemic. And so it's becoming, there in the U.S., they have the Chronic Lymphocytic Leukemia Society, and they're very delighted that we have this clinical trial going on. And they featured the recent results that were presented of our vaccine versus the Pfizer results on their weekly newsletter a couple of weeks ago. It surprised me. I didn't know it was coming. I mean, I know the CLL Society very well, but and I received their newsletter because that's a constituency of which we're focused. But I saw that they were focused on it. And so their whole message is, so it looks like there's hope coming for CLL patients. No, because the founder and medical director of that society is a CLL patient himself, and he's the one that's made me well aware that most funerals he goes to of people with chronic lymphocytic leukemia, they're all about the person passed away from an infection, not from the blood cancer.
I wonder if you could maybe tell me a bit more about the company and your lead candidate and how
Sure.
your technology works.
The Geovax is listed on NASDAQ with the trading symbol GOVX. It was founded in 2001, at the time specifically for one purpose. It was during the time before there were the antiviral drugs that now fortunately save people who are diagnosed with HIV. They can live a much longer life. At that time, everybody was looking for a vaccine, and it was founded on some development work towards that. There never has been a successful vaccine developed against HIV. The company went all the way through a large phase 2A program that was funded by the US NIH. But then it got to a point where the antivirals were coming out. There was no more funding for it. And the company pivoted, and we began to look here, where can we apply our approach of doing infectious disease vaccines elsewhere? Can we apply it? And we were successful. We utilize a technology that actually is quite well known, and there's much significant expertise in the UK for this technology. It goes by 3 letters. Verbally, it stands for Modified Vaccinia Ankara, so MVA. You may recall, at least for me as a child, we all were vaccinated. We had a little scar on our shoulder that we received in school when we were young and all against smallpox. So we all got vaccinated. That was with a vaccine called Vaccinia. The problem, Vaccinia is very effective. The problem is it's contraindicated in certain populations, specifically pregnant women, children, and people with compromised immune systems. They can't tolerate it. And there were some deaths with people that were vaccinated that fit into one of those categories, or some of those, that type of thing. So starting in the 50s through the late 60s, there was a scientist that took Vaccinia and began to modify it so that it would replicate not in human cells, but it would still maintain its efficacy, but it would be exquisitely safe. And that was what resulted in the world being able to eradicate smallpox, which was announced in 1980. The last case was actually 1977. And that was a scientist that he did much of the work out of Germany. They developed it, and they did some of the work in Turkey and Ankara, so hence Modified Vaccinia Ankara. And so MVA became the vaccine that allowed the world to eradicate smallpox, which was great. And what they recognized following that was, not only was it good as a vaccine for what they would call a pox virus, that includes Mpox, what used to be known as monkeypox, as well as smallpox. They also, believe it or not, there's camelpox, there's horsepox, there's a whole bunch of pox viruses. So it's a good vaccine for that. It was tested in over 120,000 people in Germany. It's exquisitely safe. So that is what we use as the basis for our vaccines, because first of all, it was demonstrated that it could also be a good vaccine platform. You could put other antigens into that structure, into that vaccine, and they could be vaccines. For instance, we've developed successfully a vaccine for Ebola Zaire, for Ebola Sudan, for Marburg, for Zika virus, and so it becomes a good sort of platform for doing that. They have a Zika virus vaccine at University of Liverpool that uses MVA. Oxford University and the Oxford Vaccine Group and the Jenner Institute in the Oxford area are all experts utilizing MVA also. Commercially, there's been historically only one company in the world that does an MVA vaccine, that's out of Denmark, and they have the global monopoly on the current MVA vaccine that's used to address it's used in the stockpiles for bioterrorism against smallpox, but it's also used in all these outbreaks for Mpox. And we have essentially the same vaccine. It's a long story, but we have the same vaccine. And that is the basis and is our priority product, because we were granted in late May by the EMA an expedited path to bring that forward, because there's not enough capacity, supply capacity from the current manufacturer of it. So basically the single source worldwide, and they can't expand easily to expand their manufacturing capacity. And so we were granted, and we announced in June, the ability, we don't have to do a phase 1 and phase 2 human studies. We can go straight to what's known as a bridging trial that will compare in healthy individuals our vaccine versus the current vaccine. We'll do that in the locations in the EU, including the UK, as well as in Africa. and we'll have a rapid path to what they call marketing authorization or basic registration. That's our lead program. We've already manufactured the product. Right now, we're doing the packaging of it, and we expect third quarter next year to initiate the clinical trial behind that program. The readout will go rather quickly, and we think within 2 years we could see that we have product on the market and all. So we're in discussions with WHO and others because UNICEF and Gavi have a stockpile. The U.S. government has a stockpile. The U.K. has a stockpile. A lot of nations have it, and they need more product. Africa greatly needs additional product. So that's our lead program that we have, and that's in the clinic. Behind that is our COVID-19 program, which we have two, as I mentioned, we have the two phase 2 clinical trials. One is the one among chronic lymphocytic leukemia patients. That's the one that we're expanding into sites in the UK starting in 2026. So we'll be expanding the sites in there and working with people, again, addressing immunocompromised patients. We have the one that's immunocompromised blood cancer patients who are receiving stem cell transplantation. That one is currently in 6 sites now in the United States, and we're considering whether or not we want to expand that one further. That's still doing some enrollment, that type of thing. And then the other program we have that will be a focal point will be again, it's not a vaccine, but it'll be our phase 2 trial in first-line head and neck cancer of our gene therapy delivered with a vaccine vector. And that one will initiate towards the end of next year, and that will look at our technology combined with Merck's Keytruda. And so that's right. And then behind all that always we have this new advanced manufacturing process for MVA vaccines in general, and that's one that we think will be a real game changer because from what we've demonstrated so far, we get a 10-fold increase in yield coming out of manufacturing, and we're able to do twice as many batch runs in a certain time period than you usually can do, and it reduces the cost by 5-fold, so it's a lot less expensive, and it'll enable us to have product that does not require any refrigeration. It doesn't get people excited because people get excited about products, but this is a real game changer, as you can imagine, and we think it'll change the whole basis of what we're doing in infectious disease vaccines. We sort of on a roll. We can always use more money. You know, we always say, the people say, what's your number one priority? I said, I and the CFO, we have a common priority, which is our balance sheet. The balance sheet drives the pace of everything we can do because we're pre-revenue. And so while the rest of the team are working on the programs and moving those forward, our job is to keep the flow of capital coming into so that they can go, and where possible, go a little bit faster when we can.
You gave a great overview earlier of the current state of the vaccine industry, I guess. Are you optimistic about the industry in the long run, especially with what you were saying about what's happening in the US right now?
I'm most optimistic, and I'll tell you why. One, because we did a mapping process about this time last year. We were at Bio Europe in Stockholm the day after Election Day. So we all woke up and we said, well, Trump won. That means because everything we know, he's going to be bringing in RFK Jr. to head HHS. So we began to map out what are the themes. You know, everybody was saying he's Mr. Anti-vaxxer and those things. And so we set aside what we heard as all the negativity, and we said, let's see what we can find. And what we found out was, one, we don't agree with everything that's being espoused by the administration or even legislators, you know, that type of thing, policymakers. But at the same time, we saw some common themes, and some of those were looking for a multi-antigen approach in vaccines, and that fits us very well. And others was transparency and all of those types of areas. So we took those to heart, and we began to reach out, and we are working across the aisle. So we work with Republicans who are very staunch supporters of bringing biomanufacturing back to the U.S. more often than not, you know, bringing that in there. And at the same time, there are Democrats who on many public policies wouldn't talk to that same Republican, but the two of them are aligned when it gets into certain themes like vaccine transparency. Let's be open, let's rebuild the trust, let's work together, and also let's build a stronger vaccine base of manufacturing in the U.S. For us, the technology we utilize for infectious disease vaccines, there's not one manufacturer in the U.S. that manufactures using that. We have to utilize manufacturers in France right now. But with our new vaccine technology, we'll be doing it also in the U.S. And so we think we'll be stimulating that, and that we'll have support from legislators, from the federal government, and others as we go forward with doing that. Because at the end of the day, for so many infectious diseases, the only way to rid oneself of it is through a vaccine. You can have therapies that can treat people, but a vaccine is how you eradicate a particular disease or taper it down or lessen it so that instead of it being a severe infection that hospitalizes and for certain populations puts them at a potential risk of death, can we take someone who has COVID-19 and make it a much milder case? It doesn't mean they won't be infected, but something that's tolerable. And if we can do that for immunocompromised, we've made a huge contribution. So I think in as one looks at it, whatever the long run is, but I think even in the next few, before this current administration is out, we'll start seeing, let's say, much greater integration between industry and policymakers and working together in cooperation, I believe very strongly in.
Immunization is definitely a big topic, not only what's going on in the US, but antimicrobial resistance, virus evolution, how to ensure immunization across the planet, so a day dedicated to it is definitely appropriate. There is also an Awareness Week, early every year. Anyway, that's it for this week's podcast. If you do want to get in touch with guest opportunities, or if you want to advertise, please feel free to contact me at jim@deeptechdigest.com. Hopefully there will be an announcement about something new next week as well. I'm sure you're on the edge of your seats with anticipation. So, until next time, wherever in the world you are, I hope you have a great week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time for another Base to Base Biotech podcast. The Base to Base Biotech podcast is an Air Coastal Media Limited production.